Good afternoon, everybody. It is Tuesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I am joined today by Emily Kaplan, ESPN NHL insider. She'll be on the broadcast Sunday. Is it Saturday or Sunday, Emily?
Saturday. We got
Saturday for Penguins Bruins at PPG Paints Arena on ABC. Emily, how are you?
I'm great, but you buried the lead, Adam. We are former colleagues at the Daily Collegiate at Penn State. I believe we were candidates together that came up together. So it's super fun to be able to reconnect with you.
It is awesome. We were, I believe, fall of 2009 at the old Daily Register, as we called it in the newsroom. And I think we might be the last two members still in the industry of that candidate class standing. So I think that's a fun distinction for both of us.
I love it. No, and I told you, you're killing it. You have a journalism job in 2023, which says a lot. But you were always one of my favorites, and I love to see that you're still in the industry and in Pittsburgh, which I always knew you were such a big Pittsburgh guy.
Yeah, had to move here. I mean, working at the Post-Gazette was kind of always a dream job. You always, I think you and I both coming from it. You're on TV now, but we were both, I think print babies really, and getting to work at your hometown newspaper is a great honor.
Pretty sick. It's pretty sick. It was always my dream. I grew up in New Jersey, and I always wanted to write for the Newark Star-Ledger. So maybe one day. I think that might be my swan song.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been great to see you, be on the screen, and I can, I'll be like, I know that girl. And so it's been awesome to watch your career as well. Emily, you know a lot about the NHL. You know a lot about the Penguins. So we're excited to have you on today. I think the hot topic in Pittsburgh really for the last handful of months has been Ron Hextall, general manager. Fans are highly critical of the way this roster was constructed, the bottom six, the goaltender situations at times, even the blue line. What is the national perception and the industry perception of the job he has done in Pittsburgh compared to where fans may be locally?
It's interesting. I always think that fans locally are a little bit more revved up, right? Because they're so passionate about the team and they want them to do so well. And sometimes nationally you can look at it more from a big picture perspective. I think Ron Hextall was brought in because of the way that he was able to gather a huge prospect pool in Philadelphia. And he was really patient with those prospects, right? Like it took forever for Carter Hart to get pulled up to the big club, or forever if you ask Philly fans. And I think that the Penguins ownership group said, okay, we've had years of going for it. We need to restock and repile. And I also think that Ron Hextall was brought in because he was someone who could make hard decisions, like potentially having to part with Evgeni, Malkin, and Kris Letang when they became UFAs. And then I think the directive on Ron Hextall switched because I think Fenway Sports Group said, hold up, Kris Letang, Evgeni Malkin, and Sidney Crosby are so important to this fan base, to this city. We can't get rid of them just yet. Let's keep this core together. And when you keep that core together, you're inherently going for it, right? Because they're veterans. So collecting that prospect pool wasn't quite as important as much. So I think that there's a little bit more empathy for Ron Hextall from the national perspective of saying, okay, he took this job and, all of a sudden the team had to go in a different direction. That said, I don't know if it's much softer than what people in Pittsburgh are saying. I think they've looked at a lot of the moves that they've made and they seem kind of puzzling. Why would you go and this is your trade deadline to go get big pieces, and why is Mikael Granlund the one guy that you feel like is going to really elevate you and bring you to that next level, and especially given his contract situation? I think Kulikov we can put a pause on just because he hasn't really played. He got injured pretty early on after they traded him, but I think there's a sense nationally that this is a really telling season in Pittsburgh, and it does look at this moment like they might make the playoffs, and that's super exciting to keep that streak going. But if it's not a long run, and if they don't miss the playoffs specifically, I do think that there's a strong chance Fenway Sports Group, now that they've been in there and have assessed the landscape, will make a change in their leaders this summer.
That's very interesting because I think you led in well to my next question is I think a lot of fans are already assuming that that's what's going to happen here, that it's baked in, and then that's just kind of waiting for these last games, whenever they end, to play out. What from your perspective would it take for it really to be that? Where would a first round loss? Is it getting swept if they go to 7, especially if they end up in that 8th seed and they play Boston, which has had such a great season, and they put up a fight against Boston? Is that enough? What do you think Ron Hextall's Penguins have to do for him to save his job?
It's tough to say because, I can even imagine a situation where they win a playoff round and he still doesn't come back. Again, this is really about Fenway Sports Group coming in, assessing the landscape, and figuring out what they want in their long-term plan and when they're ready to pull that trigger and say, okay, this is the direction we're going to go to. I also think it depends on who's available. Like if there a candidate out there that's available and they're like, if we can get him right now or her, that'll make our team completely better. This is the person we want leading our team for the next 5-10 years. Of course, general managers rarely last that long, but we can always think aspirationally. And then they would go for it. So I don't know if there's like a magic number in mind, but I do get the sense that they have enough data points now. They see where the team is at, that they might make a change, even if, the Penguins do make the playoffs or do win a couple games in the playoffs.
Is it kind of a matter of fit in some ways as well?
Totally. And you can look at some of the things that Fenway Sports Group values in their other franchises. The Red Sox, baseball inherently is, but are super analytically minded. And I would expect someone who's a little more progressive and forward thinking when it comes to numbers and not necessarily like the old school hockey guy, that might come in. I think analytics would be a really interesting area to kind of pinpoint. I also just think someone there's two roles here, right? Because Ron Hextall is also attached to Brian Burke, and I think if one of them goes, both of them goes. And that president of hockey ops role, if they go and look for someone new, they want someone that's forward facing and maybe that can complement that GM, that can speak to the media, that can be charismatic when it comes to sponsors or in a press conference. So I'm really curious to see what partnership they hypothetically could come up with. But again, these are all hypothetics. Ron Hextall and Brian Burke still have jobs right now. And as of now, the Penguins are tracking to keep that playoff streak alive.
What's your read on how involved Fenway Sports Group really is here? I think there's a sense locally that they're kind of aloof. I think recently it's come to light that John Henry, who leads Fenway Sports Group, has all of the different sports teams that the group owns in his Twitter bio, but not the Penguins. I think that's led to a sense of kind of mystery with this ownership group. What's your perception of how involved and how much they care about the Penguins compared to their other, I think probably bigger name properties in some cases?
I think it's just something that we have to accept as a hard truth as hockey fans and people who work in the hockey industry. We are lesser of a sport when it comes to money and revenue than EPL is, for sure. Definitely than the NFL is and than NBA is. Baseball has been, obviously their bread and butter as an organization when they got into the sports landscape. So the Red Sox will always hold a beloved place in their heart. And obviously that's one of the marquee franchises in all sports across North America. I remember last year in the playoffs when I was covering the Penguins, I did see John Henry and his wife at a game. I'm not sure how involved on a day-to-day basis he is, but I know he does delegate down, and there are members of his leadership team that are in constant communication with the Penguins. They do show up at leadership events, and they're around the team asking questions, gathering data points. I think they've built also a relationship with Mike Sullivan. Remember, when we're talking about leadership, they were the ones that really believed in Mike Sullivan and gave him an extension when he still had one more year remaining on his contract, which is pretty rare in hockey. So clearly Mike Sullivan is their guy. So I think they're quietly involved on the outskirts, but maybe, like you said, there's some slights, like them not being in the Twitter bio, or maybe just not as invested as their other properties, which they've had more time to invest in.
What's it going to take for, whether it's Ron Hextall or whether it's someone else in this modern, NHL economic landscape, to unwind some of these contracts that have, kind of sunk this team a little bit this season? But whether it be Jeff Carter, you mentioned Granlund, they've kind of put the Penguins in a difficult salary cap spot, despite the fact the core of Sidney Crosby, Kris, Letang, and Evgeni Malkin's making less really than they have since they were on their rookie deals. In theory, those guys aren't the problem with the salary cap situation. It's some of these other contracts. How hard are those going to be to move in a modern NHL economy where, they throw around a lot of money at the beginning, and it seems there's a lot of bad contracts in the NHL.
Yeah, it's sad that you're already saying, what's it going to take for us to unload Michael Granlund? He's barely been there, 2 months? But at the trade deadline this year, talking to general managers and people around the league ahead of time, like months before, everyone's like, oh, nothing's going to happen. No trades. The salary cap remaining stagnant is going to completely hamstring anyone. And then what did we see? One of the most active and exciting trade deadlines that I think I've definitely seen in my time covering the sport. I've only been around Elbite for 5 years, but still there was just so much excitement, so many unexpected moves and maneuvering, because we're in a really interesting time in the NHL right now. parity is at an all-time high, so more teams think they can go for it. But there's also teams that had been staples for years, the Washington Capitals, the Nashville Predators, who are now having to take a step back and saying, okay, let's reload for the future, and they're willing to take on other contracts. So all of this is to say, I think this summer is going to shape up for a lot of movement. The rise of a third-party team taking on contract is a huge trend. You know, we see some of the things that the Arizona Coyotes are doing. We're kind of joking that they're like the Cayman Island Coyotes, but they're taking a lot of dead contracts on, really where they can only just pay out insurance, so they don't actually have to pay real money. And I think there's enough situations like that in the league where teams are thinking creatively of how to take on bad contracts that should the Penguins leadership group want to unload one of these guys, there could be some options there. But the problem is it's going to cost you, and it's going to cost you draft capital, which, if we go back to our original point, was the real reason Ron Hextall was brought in, because the Penguins have such a bare cupboard when it comes to draft picks and prospects because they've gone for it all these years. And that's not something they really should be in position of having to give up right now.
Emily, there's a lot of structural problems that we've talked about with the Penguins, and I think that's probably primary in people's minds about why they are where they are. But there's also been some talk about Mike Sullivan and the way his Penguins want to play, which is fast, which is like those teams were in 2016 and 2017 when they were winning Stanley Cups. The perception is that they don't have the personnel to do that now, and the Penguins are still trying to play the same way. Do you think that's a valid criticism of this coaching staff, even if it's maybe not the primary reason that the Penguins have been the team they've been this season?
I don't know. I think if you go around the NHL and you start asking people who's the best coach, who does the best job coaching, who has the smartest ideas, Mike Sullivan would routinely come up top 5. If not top of people's lists. He's a fantastic coach. He has a fantastic coaching staff, some really talented assistants that I don't think get enough credit. Todd Reardon, what he does with the D, Mike Vellucci, who has been a winner at multiple levels before he got here. They're great assistants. I think the real big issue, it's personnel, but what personnel is available? And, as we talk right now and they're going the stretch run, they're without 4 of their top 6 defensemen, their bottom 6, not really an enviable bottom 6. I think around the league, you'd probably not put that in, your top 5. I'd just say that. So I think they're just kind of dealing with the hand that they've been dealt with the amount of injuries that they have. Obviously, goaltending has just been unreliable. I think, to Tristan Jarry at this point, it's just touch and go because you just can't rely on him to stay healthy. They love him when he is healthy. He just hasn't been. So all of those factors are, I think, why you haven't seen the Penguins at peak form. But the question of personnel versus the style they want to play, playing fast doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have, Connor McDavid's on your team. You can have players that aren't necessarily the most fleet of foot, but they can still play fast and making quick decisions with the puck in the style that they play. That said, Jeff Carter is a player that's never going to play fast, right? There's certain guys that just don't fit that mold.
Yeah, I think that's an important point worth making. Emily, you mentioned the goaltending situation. You were there Saturday night for that thrilling win over Washington. And I think a lot of people in Pittsburgh kind of felt that was the game where Casey DeSmith earned the right to kind of be the guy down the stretch. Is that the sense you're getting, that he's earned this right over Tristan Jarry in the last handful of months? Of course, Tristan Jarry is dealing with an injury as well, so that's a factor. But kind of regardless of that, do you get this sense of momentum behind Casey DeSmith?
My sense is that the coaching staff and management groups feels like they can't make any definitive statements about the goaltending because it has been so unpredictable, because there have been so many twists and turns. So as of now, I think Casey DeSmith is showing that he's someone that they can trust. And he's showing someone that has earned more starts. But if Tristan Jarry can get healthy and stay healthy, I still think that he is going to be someone that they want to put at net because they do know what he's capable of. And the truth is, Casey DeSmith has had stretches and flashes of this where he's been awesome, but then it sometimes crashes back down to earth. So my sense right now is it's very touch and go. It's whoever's playing best at that moment, who's ever available at that moment is who they're going to ride, but they're not ready to make any definitive declarations of this is our starter, this is who we're riding through the playoffs.
I'm going to circle back, Emily, to kind of an earlier conversation about the offseason and the way things could play out. So I think specifically with the Penguins core of getting Malkin, Kris, Letang, Sidney Crosby. What's your read on is the priority still building around those guys, or is there a possibility that, if there is a management change that maybe they unwind those contracts they signed last year and kind of take a different philosophy of building this team. Do you think those guys are secure here for the, I mean, I guess it's not really the long run at this point, but the immediate future, or do you think there could be a shuffle there?
I do. I think as long as those players want to be in Pittsburgh, and look, the way that Evgeni Malkin and Sidney Crosby celebrated his game-winning goal last Saturday night, it shows that guy still cares a damn much about winning and winning in that city. Kris Letang, just look at everything he's gone through this year, the way he's been completely overtaxed because of the defensive depth. Like, he takes a lot of pride in being a Pittsburgh Penguin. So as long as those guys aren't asking out, and there's no inclination that they will, I think for them, it's very important for them to try to finish their career in Pittsburgh and create that legacy. I don't see them going anywhere. Again, I think when Fenway Sports Group, initially had an idea where, yeah, we can part with one or two of those guys this past summer, and that might be okay, and it's time for us to move on. And then I think they looked at the data of how important they are to this fan base, how important they are to filling the seats, important they are to that playoff streak. And right, like, now that we're on these dog days of, really grinding it out, who have been the three most important players? It's been those three guys, right? Like, Crosby's been unreal. Letang, I mentioned the minutes. Malkin has come up in some big moments. I don't see a situation where they pivot from that. I think you ride out this core, and then come some difficult times potentially, because the truth is this organization has gone from like the Mario Lemieux era and then the Sidney Crosby era, and they've been pretty spoiled in having like one singular superstar. And when you don't have that, it's sometimes a lot tougher.
Yeah, Pittsburgh fans have been very spoiled, except for the 5 years of the X generation, which I think viewers will remember well.
I forgot about those 5 years. They just completely wash away.
Well, Lemieux was there, but they were clearly in teardown mode because they were threatened with bankruptcy. They almost left town. There was lots of stuff going on. I think, fortunately for the Penguins, they're not in that situation now. But they're going to have to enter a period of rebuilding eventually. Emily, what is the upside of this team? Is it, I don't think we're going to call it a Stanley Cup contender today as we sit here. Does it have Stanley Cup contender upside? Does it have, pulling a first round upside? What do you think this team can do, and what is it going to take to unlock that?
I honestly think they can make it to the conference finals. I think the East is so damn competitive this year. If you can avoid the Bruins in the first round, which I think is probably the biggest challenge for any team because they are the most complete team that we've seen in the league this year, it's the playoffs and anything can happen. And I'm one of those people who believes that the 82 games are one thing, and then it's a completely different game once we get to the playoffs. And it's kind of the shame in the sport because you bust your ass for those couple months, and then all of a sudden it's kind of wiped away clean. But I remember talking to Ricard Raquel, it was like 2 weeks ago now when they were in New York, and he was like, our season has been, there's certain days where we feel like we're completely unstoppable, and then there's days where hockey feels like it's the hardest thing in the world. But those days where they feel they're unstoppable, that's peak Penguins, and they have the experience, they have the structure that has been there, done it before, that can come up in big moments and be really challenging for teams when it gets to the playoffs. And you asked me what it's going to take to unlock that. Well, it always comes down to goaltending. And if they get solid, healthy goaltending, this team is capable of making it pretty far. If they're also healthy, if they're this, if they're that, like, there's a lot of ifs contingent to it. Again, it's like such an unpredictable playoff. So I think they can go that far. I also would not be shocked at all if they get in the playoffs and, lose in the first round, just because they just don't have it this year. And there was just too much this year. It just was such a trying season. And they just don't have the depth.
Yeah, I think that's the place a lot of Penguins fans are. But once the playoffs start and they start putting the yard signs out, I think people's juices get flowing in a different direction. They get fired up and they think anything's possible. And I don't know if that's true this year, but we'll find out. Emily, I also wanted to, if you have time, to toss a couple questions about old alma mater at you.
Let's go. Yes, let's do it.
What do you make of the Micah Shrewsbury situation at Penn State? There's been a lot of criticism of Penn State's handling of name, image, and likeness, that those resources weren't available for Micah Shrewsbury. I don't think that's a huge shock in basketball, but it seems there's on a collective level, there's resistance to dabbling in NIL the way other programs have. What's your read on where things stand, not just with basketball, but maybe with the athletic department in general?
Yeah, I mean, I was just really disappointed by that because, look, you and I were in school the last time they made it to the tournament, right? It was 2011, Taylor Battle. It was so magical. And then we've never been able to sustain that. And the fact that we've gone this long without having another NCAA tournament appearance, like, it's a shame. We should be able to be both a football school and a basketball school and a hockey school, which we are now, and I'm really proud of that. So when you have a guy that clearly is the guy that can recruit well, that can coach well, that can lead it, I think that you do everything in your power to keep him, because that's what the big programs do. Like, that's what we see so many times from the SEC schools and other Big Ten programs, quite frankly. And I do think that sometimes, as much as I do love our athletics program, we do operate in a little bit more of an old-fashioned model. And I do wish that we would, modernize a bit. And if these things are true and if they're hesitant on NIL, like, let's be honest, like, this is the future. Like, we got to pay the guys. So I would like to see us modernize a bit. I was really upset and disappointed to see him go. I understand why he did, and if his dream was always to coach back in the state of Indiana, like, we're not going to hold him back. But it's disappointing because I feel like, especially from a basketball perspective, we had a chance to start building here. And now I feel like we've just all of a sudden rewinded back to square one.
Is it going to take something bad happening to the football program to shake up perceptions of what Penn State needs to do to compete in this landscape at a high level? Because that just kind of feels like where it is for me is the name, image, and likeness stuff is kind of this opaque thing that we talk about until something drastic happens. And if you care about the basketball program, we've reached that point. But as you know, there's very few of us, I think, that think that way. Is it going to take something like the football program losing a big recruit, maybe having a big transfer, maybe even losing, Coach James Franklin at some point to jar people into a reality of the way college sports are now?
Yeah, it's a great question, because when you look at our football team, I mean, it's been pretty charmed under James Franklin in the sense that he's recruited really well. He's gotten top guys. We've put up some really good results, even though it hasn't resulted, where we eventually want to go, which is a national championship. But like, he's had a pretty good track record, and we've built a pretty good thing with some pretty good players. So I am curious to see, like, would that be the ripple effect? I don't know. But it does feel like at Penn State, the one thing I do know is, as successful as all of our other D1 programs are, and we have such incredible success stories, right? Like, when it comes to volleyball and soccer and all of these other different sports, football is king. And the fact that football is done kind of well, maybe lets them not worry about the other stuff as much.
I'm glad you mentioned the football team, because I think there's high expectations after winning the Rose Bowl this season. Do you think that's fair? What are your expectations for how far Penn State should get in 2023 with Drew Aller replacing Sean Clifford at quarterback?
Yeah, I'm excited to see a change of quarterback. And as great as Sean Clifford was, and as much as he did for the program, there's always like something as an alma mater when you're there as like a fifth-year senior. It's like, okay, there's a reason you've been here 5 years. Like, we're ready to move on, or ready to see the young guys. So I'm excited to see it turn over. I think that James Franklin, like I said, has just done a terrific job recruiting. And every year, even when we lose guys to the draft and we lose, some of our top players, it feels like we're constantly reloading. So my expectation is that we'll still be a top 10 team in the country, that we'll be fighting for it. We'll probably lose some heartbreaker to Ohio State and Michigan that'll keep us out of the national championship, and we'll go to a good bowl game again.
That's the Penn State football story at this point, right? Emily, any final thoughts on the Penguins? Anything you want to tease for the broadcast on Saturday?
No, I just I feel really lucky. Like, when I got the schedule, I had 4 Penguins games in the span of 2 weeks. And I was like, oh boy, this is a lot of Pittsburgh, but it's been such an interesting time for the team. It's been really fun to cover. And I know that for, fans, they love their local broadcasts. And I understand when the national guys and gal come in, it's not always ideal, but I appreciate those who have, said that, we're doing a good job, and just would say that we're trying the best that we can to, cover your team and cover it fairly. And excited to see where it goes. And also, I just want to shout out to you. Like, it's just been awesome to be able to reconnect with you. And I'm proud of you for killing it in journalism and working for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And we'll do this again.
Absolutely, Emily. Thank you so much for coming on. And I can just say, I've really enjoyed ESPN having hockey back. I think it lends kind of a big event feel that I think hockey's been lacking. I think you guys kind of give those stakes, with your coverage. And Sean McDonough, I was listening to him on Saturday night, and it just feels like a big game when he's calling it.
Well, I appreciate that. So hopefully you guys like it, because you got a little bit more of us.
Absolutely. Well, Emily, thank you so much for your time. Everyone else, if you enjoyed this video, please pop a like, help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our video content. Christopher Carter on the North Shore Drive. We'll have plenty of football talk, maybe some baseball talk later in the week with the Pirates getting fired up on Thursday, believe it or not. And of course, please check out the subscription deal down in the description. $6 for 6 months of access to post-gazette.com. Everything I'm writing, everything our Penguins writers, Matt Vensel and Andrew Dustin are writing, everything all of our Steelers writers are producing. You can get all of that for just $1 a month. So make sure you check that out. Emily, thank you so much for stopping by, and we will reconnect soon.
Thanks, Bittner.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.